This is the story of internally displaced people in Uganda and their fight for land to call home. More than 90% of the Acoli people, together with many surrounding communities, were evacuated from their homes into internally displaced people's camps, IDP camps, for a decade or more from the mid-1990s as a result of the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, insurgency. On return from the camps, many communities found their land occupied or otherwise expropriated. In the case of Apaa, an area on the western borders of the Acoli subregion, returnees in 2006-07 discovered that in their absence the land they had previously lived on had been reallocated from Amaru to Ajimini district and gazetted, official demarcated, as East Madi Wildlife Reserve. This wildlife reserve was then leased to a foreign investor, Lake Albert Safaris, for game hunting in a private-public partnership. The community has experienced successive episodes of violent evictions while the controversy over the land is still awaiting resolution. The community, estimated to be up to 26,000 people, find themselves faced with apparently insurmountable barriers to asserting their rights, preventing them from engaging effectively in post-conflict recovery. Gazettement meant that the land was no longer considered customary land but has become state-controlled land. The Uganda Wildlife Authority, UWA, police and army were instructed to use force to evict them with apparent impunity. Influential politicians were also using the boundary confusion to encourage ethnic division and competition over the land in an area that had previously harmonious community relations. However, the community have refused to abandon the area, their only source of food and livelihood. In this violent and unstable situation, careful strategies have to be found to support the community in their ongoing search for justice. According to returnees, their ancestors had occupied the area around Apaa since pre-colonial times. One elder of the community, Onek Gervais Atiyah, insists, "Our grandfathers' grandfathers are buried here." Grave sites and some few land documents are held as evidence of this. In more recent times, before the displacement to internally displaced peoples, IDP, camps, the residents received services, voted for local government representatives and paid license fees in Amaru district and before that Gulu district. National ID cards describe them as, residents of Apaa village, Labwa parish, Pabu sub-country, Amaru. However, the Uganda Wildlife Authority and many local and national politicians from Ajimini claim that during their absence the land was correctly identified as falling within Ajimini district and was gazetted by Parliament in 2002 as part of East Madi Wildlife Reserve. Following a 2015 government decision to annex part of Pabu sub-country, the local government minister, Tom Buttheim, officially handed over Apaa to Ajimini district in 2017, telling the people, "Concentrate on your new constituency, the other one has now gone away." A serious humanitarian situation resulted with families scattered into the bush or setting up temporary shelters in villages and trading centers. A documentation exercise with geotagged photographs shows that at least 844 huts have been burned since late 2017. Basic services, such as schools and health centers, have also closed due to the insecurity and lack of clarity around which authority is responsible for delivery in the area. Some facilities are now occupied as shelters for displaced people. An Amnesty International investigation led to a demand for urgent action and brought much needed attention to the situation. As a result of the humanitarian crisis, ActionAid Uganda has responded both to provide humanitarian relief in the form of tarpaulins for displaced people and to engage with communities to support their fight for their human rights. Meetings were held with community members, CSOs and leaders in order to build capacity for nonviolent activism. An evolving strategy of engaging civil society and politicians to find a solution to the crisis was initiated. A meeting was organized with the paramount chief of Gulu, the Archbishop of Gulu, many community leaders and CSO representatives, and following discussion a delegation including religious leaders, media and an Amaru MP was sent to intervene with the armed forces. Some immediate respite for the residents resulted. A second delegation resulted in soldiers temporarily leaving the area but returning soon after. Community resistance. Despite the serious nature of the conflict, It only received much public and official attention when the despairing women of Apaa stripped naked to shame a delegation of government officials and surveyors who arrived to impose the new district boundary in July 2015. Aneka Urimra, an elder woman of the community, describes what brought her to take this drastic action. "I am one of the women who participated in the nude protest in 2015. My son Apaa was killed in 2014 by Uganda Wildlife Authority during the forceful evictions, and I'm still mourning him to this day. I lost over 50 acres of land. My hut was burnt twice. Now I have just roofed my new shelter here on the narrow strip I was given as a refugee, and it is in this shelter I now live with my grandchildren here in Apaa Center. I keep these burnt belongings as reminders of what happened." The increasing attention brought to the situation led to parliamentary debates but failed to stop the attacks. The president proposed visiting Apaa on 27 June 2018 to talk to the communities. This visit was postponed at the last minute, but while families in Lulai area had traveled to attend the meeting in Apaa Center, their homes were attacked and destroyed by the army. A second scheduled visit on 5 July was also postponed. With more than 2,000 recently homeless people and faced with apparent official indifference and impunity for the forces acting against them, the communities had to find another route to influence events. On July 11, after traveling for nearly 100 kilometers by foot and lorry, 234 women, children and men from Apaa entered the compound of the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, UNOHR, in Gulu in a nonviolent action to highlight their predicament. They were once more displaced from their homes, but this time voluntarily, in order to bring their predicament to the door of the global body mandated to protect human rights. This delegation occupied the UNOHR compound for more than a month as part of a considered strategy. Their immediate demand was for the UN body to engage the president to enforce the 2012 High Court injunction, to immediately cease the violent attacks and ensure withdrawal of security forces. If the government failed to respond, their next demand was for the High Commissioner to engage foreign embassies to suspend funding for the Ugandan government. The response of the UN agency was initially less than welcoming, with no direct formal engagement, but soon MPs, religious leaders and CSOs were visiting, bringing supplies and holding talks with the delegation. There were certainly risks associated with a large group leaving their families behind in Apaa with an uncertain welcome ahead of them in Gulu. It was calculated that this UN body would be less likely to confront the delegation violently and would need to engage with the issue. However, the unpredictable logistics of transport, gaining access to the compound and supporting the community through an extended period of occupation needed to be supported on an open-ended basis. Despite the attempts of the UN agency to cut off sources of support, the occupiers refused to leave without action. UNOHR claimed it was monitoring and engaging government but was not in a position to make demands of a host government. Different approaches were pursued while the attention the occupation gained kept the media profile of the issue high. Representatives traveled to Kampala for meetings with foreign embassies, the Speaker of Parliament and Uganda's Land Commission of Inquiry. This resulted in the Commission opening an investigation and the EU and US ambassadors agreeing to raise the issue with President Museveni. Despite the attempts of the UN agency to cut off sources of support, the occupiers refused to leave without action. UNOHR claimed it was monitoring and engaging government but was not in a position to make demands of a host government. Different approaches were pursued while the attention the occupation gained kept the media profile of the issue high. Representatives traveled to Kampala for meetings with foreign embassies, the Speaker of Parliament and Uganda's Land Commission of Inquiry. This resulted in the Commission opening an investigation and the EU and US ambassadors agreeing to raise the issue with President Museveni. Compensation and disperse were able to attempt to buy land elsewhere. Meanwhile, the affected people, having suffered so much and shown brave resistance in the face of apparently impossible forces, are equally determined not to accept. The result has been the President rescinding the decision and forming a third committee, under the leadership of the Deputy Speaker of Parliament, which the Apaa community are grasping as a possible lifeline to help resolve the issue in a way that respects their constitutional rights. As court injunctions against violent evictions have failed to protect them so far, Community leaders are considering an appeal to the International Criminal Court if a decision that respects their rights is not delivered and implemented. The community has demonstrated exceptional resilience over the years since their return from IDP camps, but will require their leadership and resources to be supported further in the coming months.